Everybody likes to think of their ancestors as being great people, true, honest, hardworking, very successful, and that just isn't the way it was. I think I was always a bit of a rebel. I ran away and went to kindergarten, and my mother, one morning I remember one of my girlfriends came by and she said, I'm going to kindergarten. I said, oh, that sounds like a great idea. She said, well, so I went home and I said to my mother, can I go to kindergarten? I said, so-and-so's going. And she said, oh, no, you can't go, no. Well, I disappeared. And I was playing with, she'd given me a great big ball to play with, and she thought that'll keep me at home, Well, I disappeared with the ball, and she couldn't think of where I'd gone. She finally said, oh, yeah, she mentioned kindergarten, so she went, and there I was. And I did things like that. I was born in Vancouver, 700 block Georgia Street East, which is Strathcona, which is apart from the Japantown area. So I grew up in a very cosmopolitan area with all kinds of kids, Ukrainian, Polish, Italian, Japanese, you name it, they were there, and we all played in English. That was our common language. And then I also grew up in a family of boys. I didn't have any sisters. So, of course, boys were no different than girls as far as I was concerned. And they didn't like the way I talked to them freely, They thought, because to them, especially the older ones, they thought, oh, how is it that she can talk to them and I can't? And, of course, they usually had a crush on that boy or something. So things didn't. So I wasn't especially liked. in Japanese school anyway, yeah. Well, my mother stayed at home. Of course, if I ever say this, it's like, you're a housewife, right? But she used to say, there are a lot of things I do that are not, you can't see. She used to say, because we'd say, well, you don't do anything all day long, yeah. And she was very tough because she had had a very good upbringing in Japanese finishing school, like high school is like finishing school. And so she knew what appropriate behavior was. And I certainly wouldn't do what she wanted me to do. So we'd be crossing swords sometimes. But my father was a carpenter and been trained in Japan, and his father had told him, I guess, to get a trade before he came to Canada. And he wouldn't send money home for him to get more academic education. But my father always, I think, wanted it, so he understood when I wanted to go on. But anyway, he was a very hardworking, kind man. And of course, he did have a temper. He could let loose. Although I still remember some things about that. But he was a very honest person. And he was also self-educated. He knew more about Stalin and communism than I'll ever get to know, And although he was a carpenter, when work was light, he would work in a sawmill or something like this, so that he understood what labor was like in the labor year. So he was. I think he belonged to the Canadian, the Japanese labor union. I went to the Strathcona school where the Japantown people went too, and they were different. In fact, I often tell their story, but in grade 1, when I first started, some Japantown kids came to me and they said, would you like to play Lanchi Plan? And I said, what is it? And then they're describing it, and I said, oh, you mean run, sheep, run. That's what we said. But that's the way it was. And then because I was more friendly with the kids I had grown up with, they found that rather annoying, or I don't know how to put it. But so I didn't. I was I was outside the Japanese group of children too. I don't know what I would have done without the Carnegie Library, because that was the only way I could get books to read, because it wasn't the days when parents couldn't buy you books, and my mother wouldn't know where to get them anyway, or what kind to get. Oh, every Saturday I'd go there and get the maximum number of books out, return all the books and get another load. And but you know, when I think of it now, it was sad how little there was there. And I usually went alone. I had friends, and once in a while my friends would go with me, but they didn't want to go as regularly as I did. And then we would, especially if I was with a friend, we would go over to the next door of the Carnegie Library where they had that small museum, and we'd go up and look at there was a little mummy of a little boy, and we used to look at it and scream and think that was great, you know, but we just had to go and look at it and scream, yeah. And by the time I was in grade 5, the Japanese school teacher by then, my Japanese school teacher was a male, Mr. Takashira, and he would rant and rave at me and say, "Otsukiyanai." That means, you know, you don't have the ability to sit down and be a lady. And he says, even the Kocho sensei says that. And he says, you've got to do something. And I thought, well, I'm trying, but I don't know how to keep still, you know. Yeah, but he was a wonderful teacher. At the time of Pearl Harbor, we all went to our class the following Monday, and he said, to whom do you owe allegiance? And the kids got up, and one said, America. Another one says, Nippon Teikoku, you know, the Empire of Japan. And other people were answering, and I thought, this is all wrong, you know. I know what the teacher wants us to say. He wants us to say Canada because we're Canadians. But I said, if I do, I'm going to get beaten up. So I'm not going to say it. And of course, that's exactly what he wanted us to say. And he said, no, you're Canadians, you're born in this country, you owe your allegiance to Canada. When my father was being shipped out just before, I remember my oldest brother saying to him a day or two before he left, he said, why didn't you get your Canadian citizenship? And my father said, well, I didn't see the need for it, and I intended to go back to Japan anyway. And then he said, well, our good friend, your good friend, so-and-so is, he doesn't have to go to camp. And he said, well, he's got a citizenship. And he said, well, I don't see why you didn't get yours then. My father said, you just wait. You just wait. It'll prove, you know, it's going to end that I've always done the right thing. So he believed that Japan, that it was better to be a Japanese citizen than a Canadian citizen. Well, he was up at Thunder River, Blue River, BC, and I found that place. When I was doing some of that research for my book, we went up, a friend and I went up, and I was making interviews along BC, and then we went up to from Banff up to Jasper, and then we took the Yellowhead Highway, because I was just very curious about where these men had been. My father had spent most of the time there taking long logs and cutting it down the middle and using it for benches, and they had put a bunch together for tables for the dining room, and he had made log houses for them to live in, because they were living in tents up to then. So I could, and the odd thing I saw, and then there's a photo of him taken with a bunch of other carpenters that had built the houses, and they were right by they had built a bridge to across the Thunder River, and there was a photograph taken of them lined up beside it. So I said, well, that's the Thunder River, and it's going to it flows into the Blue River. And I said, I wonder where the bridge was. And I looked, and you could see where the footings were. And so I was really quite pleased to see that place. Mm-hmm. Yeah. My mother's a very sharp cookie, you know, and she went and I think drew all the money out, and she had it around her middle. Yeah, she had all kinds of money there that people really had no idea that she had. Yeah. The Niseis were supposed to have a truck by which they came around to all the houses and pick up all the stuff that had to go. But in our case, we were due at the railway station, and they hadn't come to pick it up. But a Mr. Okimura, I remember, who was in a neighborhood, and he was a very helpful. He was too old to go road, can't be seen, but he was there. And he came by to check on us, and he said, oh, we'll have to do something about your stuff, because nobody's come to get it. So he found a Chinese, one of the truck vegetable sellers or something, and he said, told him to come, and then he loaded the stuff up, and he says, I'll go with him, and I'll see to it that it gets down to where it should. So he did. But it was funny that because at the last minute, my mother said to my brother, who was 15, going on 16, she said, by the way, she said, put a box around that kitchen stove. And he said, what do you mean put a box around that kitchen? I'm taking it. And she took it. She took the kitchen stove, mattress, and a piece of linoleum for my kitchen, and there were 2 huge trunks too. So I don't know, when people talk about, and the sewing machine, so when people talk about the limited amount of
weight, they talk
weight.
About weight.
Well, our stuff sure came to more than that. In Lemon Creek, you know, oh, my father was so old-fashioned. He didn't think very highly of dancing. A fellow and I were supposed to be going to the Christmas dance, and my 2 friends were going too, and they had it all arranged. Well, there was no way my parents were going. My father was going to let me go, and I was really hurt because the guy already had the tickets, and we were all set to go, and my friends were all going, and I couldn't go. And my oldest brother, he had a date, and his date's father wouldn't let her go either. So he came home absolutely disgusted, and he said, tell you what, he says, you and I are going to go. So we went. Of course, once I got there, and they found out that I was there, somebody raced up the street to get the guy and said, she's here, you know. So it was really, you know, there was all that strife between the Issei and the Nisei, and it really came out at the time. Because the Isseis could not, they just couldn't relate to this idea, you know, of Niseis behaving the way they did. I can't say that my Lemon Creek days were really horrible. And I think I was very fortunate in that I had 2 older brothers and 2 sets of friends of fellows that belonged to each gang, you see, so that, and they were very friendly with me. And so it meant I was never a wallflower because these fellows can be very shy. But if they know you, then they'll come and ask you to dance. So hey, I had a great time. If my father ever let me go to a dance. Well, I think it was very hard on my parents. Because they don't come from Hiroshima City, but it's within that prefecture, and so they found that very difficult. And then, but they didn't find out until they went to visit in '62 that my cousin had died in the bomb, as a result of the bomb. He just happened to be there. And when he found his way back to the village a week later, they said, "Who are you?" Because he was so disfigured. So, but I think the bomb itself really did not affect us that much. But I think post-war years were very difficult. Where you relocated. And we relocated to Hamilton. And I'm telling you that I think that was the worst years of my life.
Was it?
Because the adjustment. And I mean, every time I opened my mouth, Japanese words came out. And it was very strange because we had spoken this horrible mixture of Japanese and colloquial, very colloquial Japanese, and English in the camps. And so that becomes your daily language, and then all of a sudden you're trying to settle down in a Western society, and it was impossible. And by the way, we were in camp a year after, for a whole year after. We didn't leave till July of '46.
Oh.
And then they still didn't know what to do with us. So all of us, you had to choose whether you were going to settle in Manitoba or Ontario or Quebec. And where you were going to settle determined where you were going to be put temporarily. If you were saying you're going to settle down in Manitoba, you got sent to Transcona, which was a former Air Force training spot. And if you were going to Quebec, you went to Farnham, which was about the equivalent in Quebec. And if you were going to Ontario, I ended up in a German prisoner of war camp where the Luftwaffe had just left. There were barbed wires all around and lookout towers, and you ate in a mess hall, and it was really something. And I was there for about 6 weeks. And then I got to Hamilton. And then you go to Hamilton, and I had to enroll myself. But then when I enrolled, I found I had this horrible mixture of courses. And I actually wrote a letter to the teacher that I had in Lemon Creek, who was now back at University of Toronto as a forestry student. And I said, "Mr. Grant," I said, "I have these subjects. Do you think that's okay?" And he said, no, it's not okay. You have to take algebra. Because he said, what we covered was not enough algebra and not enough geometry. I see you're taking geometry, but not the algebra. So he said, go and see your principal and see whether you could just study it on your own and write the exams. So I went to see this old Colonel McQueen. He was a tall, baldy. He'd been a colonel. And he looked at me, and I told him what I wanted to do. Would he allow this? And he said, "I don't want people like you to be bringing down the standard of the school." And I looked at him, and I was shocked. And I said, and I don't know where I got the strength, but I said to him, well, he said, can I do it on my own and then just write the exam, and I'll talk to the teacher, and all I'm asking is that, he marked the exams. And I said, and if I don't do well at Christmas and Easter, I said, I won't write the final, so it won't affect the standard of the school. And he says, okay. So that part is the toughest part of my life, I think. Mm-hmm. The adjustment, leaving. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how other Niseis felt about that, but I hated being Japanese, and I wouldn't speak Japanese. And I remember I wouldn't speak it at all. And my mother introduced me down in Hamilton to a good friend of hers, in the middle of the street once. And this lady said to me, "Hajime mustard," or something, and I just looked at her and I said, well, what am I supposed to say now? I said to my girlfriend who was with me, and my mother tore me apart when I got home. She said, that was such a horrible thing to say. She said, if you don't know what to say, just say hello. She said, but I was being very smart alecky, you know. But, you know, all these things happened because of my insecurity, I think. My middle brother, well, my second brother, he's the one that searched around for a house because he'd gone ahead to Hamilton. And he found a place. And then that's why he worked so hard, because he had to pay off the mortgage along with my older brother. But my older brother was more inclined to buy fancy suits, you know, with his money than he did in helping pay the mortgage. But you see, this is where the misunderstanding came out within the community too, because they thought, why is your daughter going to university? She should be out working and helping you. And I remember one Japanese woman asking me, she saw me coming home from university, and she was asking me all kinds of questions about how I financed it and what it was like and all that. And then as we were parting, I said, oh, are you thinking of sending your daughter? And she said, not my daughter, my sons. I think for an ordinary family that was poor, you know, it was rather unusual. Yeah. But then I don't think they could have put me down. I mean, they kept me down in any way. I mean, I would have raised the roof, you know. And I was financing myself. All they had to do was feed me and give me a bed to sleep on, that's all. After I got my master's, in fact, the day I was defending my master's, I knew I was going to make it. And so I just I made arrangements to leave the next day to go to Ottawa to work. I mean, it was all arranged. And I had to actually tell them I'll be a little bit late, about 2 weeks later, because we never got around to getting my orals done, you know, my defense done. And then, so I started working. And then shortly after I met my husband, well, we dated for a while, and then we got married, and then I had 5 kids. And then he got ill, and that was the end. So we moved out west because we had always said we're going back home when we retire. And home to us was the west because that's where we started. Yeah. And then I was fortunate enough when I went to University of Victoria that they had this Japanese historian, because I went there wanting to study Japanese history, and then she realized I knew a great deal about Japanese Canadian history, and she pushed me along that direction. But just under 10 years, I think, to get my PhD from it. And then after that, it took me another almost 10 years in order to get around to writing it like that. Yes, there's quite a bit that's personal in it, because in order to make the book live, or to really make it, other than a really dull history book, I wanted to put my own personal history in. And also I found that when I was trying to interview the Issei, if I said, I'm Ishii Kenji's daughter, you know, and then I said, I think I remember you from these days. Then it opened the door, because Japanese don't talk very much. Well, I picked 1891 because that's when a sizable number, 100 contract employees went to Cumberland to work. They were hired by the Union Coal Company to work there. And they were supposed to be trained miners, but hey, Hiroshima doesn't have mines. But there was some of them had gone to Fukuoka to do some mining there, the Miyake mine, so that some of them had experience, but most of them were not farm miners at all. But by the time they got there, they had they closed the mines. Well, first of all, they couldn't get them to work because they didn't have the language, and so they were made to work not underground but outside, but the pay is cheaper. So anyway, this group, and then when they closed the mines temporarily, they just scattered, and some of the people that came on that first with that same group, they've done very well, and I was able to trace some of them. And then I stopped at 1941 because I wanted to capture the society as it had been before the war, what was destroyed by the war. Because I want to talk about Japantown and all these other different communities across, along the coast of BC. And they were mostly segregated communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when people talk about Powell Street, they remember it as a wonderful place where they walked down the street and they could get senbei here and they could get this here and all that. But they don't know about the inner workings, the trouble within the community, the strife within the community, and the differences between the people who had businesses. A lot of the people that had businesses and were very successful, they had made their money on the backs of these poor laborers. And a lot of that thing I found written by Japanese scholars post-war. And they're from Tokyo, Keizai University and stuff. There were scholars who had come to Canada and really checked up on all this stuff, and they had written these books. So I thought, oh, this is interesting. Yeah, I think my father got a big. I'm sure he knew a lot of this stuff because I could put together a lot of my memories of things that were going on. My father, I don't know. My mother might be a little bit disgusted that I've exposed a lot of this stuff, very unladylike. But my father might be laughing and say, "Yeah, good for you. You're finally able to talk about this sort of business," because he didn't. I think I'm not the average Japanese Canadian. And then I'm very outspoken. And my mother used to say, I failed. And I said, what do you mean you failed? She said, I didn't bring up a nice Japanese maiden. She says, you're just too open. Everything just shows on your face. Your anger, your happiness, your feelings, they're all on your face. And that's not right. In fact, she couldn't find the right English word, so she'd say, that's cheap, she used to say. I'd say, well, although my father was a bit like that. My mother used to sometimes say, and he'd be very abrupt sometimes, he'd say, there are different ways. There are ways in which you can say things. She says, you don't have to be so blunt, she'd say to my father. So maybe that's where it came from. I'm my father's daughter. I think the ideal for anybody is to find their niche and find something that they like and then pursue that. But, keep your mind open that there might be other things that come up. But I hope I've made some mark on my kids or something, that they can carry on so that they know what's right, wrong. And some of them think I'm a little bit crazy, I suppose, but, I don't know. I really don't know. I've never thought beyond. Who knows what the future brings? I might be a dotty old creature but in a year's time. But some of my grandchildren, I've got 10 of them. Can you imagine that? But they're all different, and they're all doing quite well, I think. Sometimes in spite of their parents. I think their grandmother is a little bit wacky, but Yeah, we'll see.